Good morning, everybody. Maybe I'll just do today's Astro Weather, the ASMR style. Maybe we'll go Pisces today. How are all you beautiful souls today? Are you ready for another day in God's creation to receive the blessings bestowed upon you? If so, you've come to the right place. I don't know if I could do a whole show like that. It might be interesting. How is everybody? Good morning. It is the Astro Weather for 22223. And I hope everybody's doing well. We got DJ MC straight up in the house, right there, front row seat. Morning, Brother Michael. And to the rest of you, I hope you're having, wherever you are, if you're on the East Coast, your day is underway. Still early enough to catch the Astro Weather. If you're on the West Coast, boy, you really got a heads up here. And for all the listeners and viewers and other parts of the world, I hope your day is evolving in a way that is representative of the wind at your back. And if it's not, then I certainly hope that you know how to tap through the gales of your life. And astrology can help in that regard. It's one of the things that astrology is good for. You can understand the winds of change in your life, and sometimes the winds are with you and sometimes they're not. And when they're not, you have to know how to navigate those conditions. And astrology can be really helpful in that regard. It's like a sextant, a compass, a map, all in one. So let's get into the Astro Weather. Boy, I was just listening to James O'Keefe, Project Veritas, and the video that got out of him addressing the Project Veritas crew. It's very touching, very profound, and we're in Pisces season, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And you know, our lives have been marked, for better or worse, by the energy and the symbolism of the Piscean age. And the Piscean age, of course, is defined by the life of Christ. And it's a very interesting story. It's a story that some people take a bit of they take a bit of reserve with confirming the story, right? There's some people who just outright don't believe it, that it could be any number of these syncretic gods, Osiris, Thor, or Odin, right? Any number of these syncretic gods that are the representation of this God man, the avatar, right? But whatever that story or take issue is the word I was looking. Still a little earlier. I tried to find the right word, right? So, and it's still early here in South Central Texas. But if we just look at the script gets played out in life. It gets played out in life all the time, whether you believe in Jesus or not. The script gets played out. And I remember watching a documentary on Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters. And Ken Kesey, there's a lot of, weird, interesting backstory around Ken Kesey, which I don't really want to get into because we don't have enough time. But he rose to immense popularity with his relationship with the Merry Pranksters. Of course, publishing two books. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and the other, Sometimes a Great Notion, both of which were made into movies. And Ken Kesey had kind of catapulted into this place of being a cultural icon, somebody who has his finger on the pulse of what's going on in the ills of the world and other things. And it all kind of came crashing down around him. And he left San Francisco. He left the hippie scene, which he helped kickstart. And he bought a farm, became a dairy farmer in Oregon. And during this documentary, he talked about uh, that process and how he was elevated to almost a Christ-like status, and then they came for him, right? And the phrase that came to my head first: they put you on a pedestal, and then they put you on a cross. Uh, came to mind while I watched that documentary, and we can see this with so many people who rise to a certain level, and then everything kind of implodes and people turn on that person. Could be a man, could be a woman. Usually it's a man. And we see the scapegoat or the sacrifice for the sins of others. This is not an uncommon theme. It's shared through other cultures as well. But it's that mythos, which is the very Piscean mythos, that informs our time. I can't tell you how many times I've read books throughout my tenure when I was an English lit major in college, and this whole motif of the Christ theme shows up again and again and again. It really becomes the symbol for the West in a big way. Even in a movie like The Omega Man with Charlton Heston, the final scene of him being in the fountain, splayed out in a Christ-like position as they take his blood, right? The blood that has the antigens, the antibodies, to essentially infuse the remaining humans on the planet, most of whom are children at that time, so that they can become immune to the disease that he created. And everything comes to this apotheosis with the whole Christ mythos with Mel Gibson's movie, The Passion, which I've never seen. But when it came out, it was huge. And focusing on really the agony of the crucifixion itself. I mean, that's when everything really hits this kind of fevered pitch. And then after that, we kind of come down on the other side of that. And of course, Mel Gibson gets into trouble in Malibu, but that's a different story. It becomes an almost sacrificial figure himself in a lot of ways. Art imitating life, or life imitating art. So when we see somebody like James from Project Veritas, James O'Keefe from Project Veritas, go through what he's going, it's the story of the West. It's the story of the 20th century, and it's still with us. Somewhere in that board meeting, he could have looked around and said, one of you will betray me. And it was probably more than just one. And this is how his evolution now is headed. And it's as if the mythos itself has to be lived out. We have to be reminded of the fact that there seems to be a sacrifice here involved on this planet. Everything is a sacrifice. This is the nature of Pisces. When you have a child, you sacrifice. If you're a good parent, you sacrifice things that are now superfluous because you want to raise a child. You sacrifice those things. You have less leisure time because you spend time with your children or your family. Everything here is a sacrifice. If you had breakfast this morning, something sacrificed itself to wind up in your stomach. Doesn't matter if it's an animal or a plant. It's still a sacrifice. This is the world that we live in, and we consciously deny the fact that sacrifice is a part of our experience here. Something sacrifices itself to give life to something else, right? This is the whole notion of the Christ mythos. And here we are in Pisces watching it play out with James O'Keefe. It's a very interesting symbol for our time. It's right here. It's right in front of us. The guy's choking up. This is the company that, he built. And what did he do? He overturned the stalls, the merchants' stalls in the temple. That's what he did. He got to Pfizer's temple. He got to Pfizer's table where they were passing out, selling junk signs. And he turned the tables over, and he took a whip and he whipped them out. Right. This was his ultimate sin, his ultimate transgression. So here we are in Pisces season, watching James O'Keefe be sacrificed. Sacrificing for the sake of the quote unquote company. Is that what's going on here? Or sacrificing himself for the rest of us? And even his life, and I don't know a lot about James O'Keefe. I don't claim to know a lot. I know a little bit, but I found out he's not married. And I find it unusual in a lot of ways. So my first thought is, well, is he queer? It doesn't really matter, right? But my second thought was maybe if he was married, he couldn't do this job. Because when you listen to the speech that he gave, it's he's traveling all the time. He's meeting with donors. He's planning. I mean, this is a man who was driven. So you can even make a case that he made a sacrifice of his own personal life to do this mission. And look, not everybody's clean. There's always an agenda somewhere. But the agenda, if it is buttressed by something bigger than the agenda, then the agenda gets a little nullified there. We all have self-interest. Okay. Let's be clear about that. But if the intent is bigger than the self-interest, it nullifies that. We can't do anything unless we're self-interested. I'm self-interested. I come here every day to do this. I do this because I enjoy it. I do this because maybe something I'll share with you makes some sense. But there's a self-interest for it in it for me. Number one, it's very therapeutic for me to do this. It gives me an opportunity to be creative. One would say that that's a luxury in many ways. And I wouldn't deny that. You know, I have a self-interest in that I have a practice. I work with people and I do readings. And this is part of the process that allows me to continue to kind of, you know, get the word out that this is what I do. So, you know, we all have some degree of self-interest. But if there is a greater mission or greater purpose or greater feeling, which I do, by the way, feel, and I do feel that James O'Keefe had that as well, then it overshadows our own self-interest. And this is the way it should be. But nothing gets done without sacrifice. Nothing. If you want to get good at something, you have to sacrifice your time. You have to sacrifice your lesser interests, right? So this is what Pisces is about, the season of sacrifice. And I guess the question is what are you sacrificing in your life right now? Maybe nothing, and maybe that's okay. But there is a time, and the time will come where we all have to face those things. Sometimes it's a moral decision. You know, go back to 2020, 2021. People were sacrificing their income, their legacy, their history, because they didn't want to do something that other people told them that they should do. That's a sacrifice. And a lot of people paid for that. So here we are cycling out of the Piscean age. We're moving into the age of Aquarius. And I think when we look at it on those terms, and this is really a long stretch of Aquarius, going back to 1962, when we had that massive stellium, you know, just predating the death of JFK by about a year. So if we're going to move away from the age of Pisces and into the age of Aquarius, which for all intents and purposes, it seems like we are, how does that look and feel and fit in the context of a sacrifice? Think about that for a moment. That as we come to the end of an age, and trust me, the people that theoretically run this place know that. And they're well aware of this idea of sacrifice. So then the stakes get much higher, right? Much, much higher. To sacrifice the old world, the old time, the old people for the new. And remember that as we go through the rest of this month. It's all on the table now. All right, let's take a look at the Astro Weather. Thanks for letting me share that. I don't often do that. I usually just jump right in. But here's Neptune. It's interesting that, I start this show and I'm almost always dealing with Pisces on the ascendant when I start the show. This is for Austin. And Neptune has just been right there. So a lot of, Neptunian and Piscean energy kind of goes into our 25 or 30 minutes or so when we're together. It hasn't been lost on me that this is part of the process here. So it's not out of context or form to talk about things like Pisces and this idea of sacrifice, which is really woven into our system. So the sun is still out there, right? It's still out there. It's floating in space at 3 Pisces, and there's Saturn. Saturn coming to its conclusion on March 8th, moves into a new sign, moves into Pisces, and that's going to be a very interesting time. Have you seen the cost of natural gas lately? It's through the roof. So we're out here, we're hanging out in space, right? This is the nature of this thing. And even the sun in Pisces, when the sun is in Aquarius, it's anchored to Saturn. They're together, they're bolted together. And there's this idea that, the individual with enough reserve, with enough purpose, with enough containment within themselves can stand against the world. Now the sun is moving away and it's in a different sign, and it's drifting. It's drifting from the safety of Saturn, right? So the sun is literally moving in space, and we don't really get any major aspects. And there's the quintile I talked about yesterday, which I think is a bit miraculous. And if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, go back and listen to yesterday's show about the quintile. But there is kind of an existential drift today. It's what it feels like, an existential drift. And, we think about how many people are really suffering. This suffering really comes up during Pisces season. The Sturm und Drang of Aquarius, and, shaking your fist against the world. And even Jesus throwing over the merchants' tables in the temple. It's very Aquarian, right? It's rebellious. And the famous words of Greta Thunberg, how dare you? Now we move into Pisces, and that rebellion, that Sturm und Drang, both on the left and the right, the radical and the conservative, is fading. And now we're moving into the drift of space. So today's one of those days where you might feel like, where are we going? What are we doing? What's this all about? And if you have those kinds of feelings every day, well, you're already learning how to swim in deep water. So just from that perspective alone, it's a very interesting day. We're moving away. We're drifting away. Literally, this is a metaphor with Pisces. The boat is moving away from the shore. And, I don't think anybody knows where we're going. We're on a journey now. And the next few days are going to be, eventually the sun is going to catch up and start sparking off against some other celestial influences. In 2 weeks, it'll square Mars, which we talked about yesterday. But I guess the next stop for the sun is going to be the sextile with Uranus. But that's going to be 12 days from now. The moon is in Aries, and it will move into Taurus in a couple of days. The sun will have some traction with the moon. So we have water and we have earth, which is the foundation for fertility. But we're still a good 48 hours out from that. The next 48 hours will be interesting. Who are we? Where are we going? And I'm sure even James O'Keefe is asking those questions right now as the sun drifts into this existential void. Very interesting energy. We've got the moon in Aries, and then we have Venus in Aries, and that is a hot ticket, right? That's a hot ticket. So while we're dealing with these larger kind of religious and existential dilemmas, part of us wants action. Part of us wants to feel intensely, immediately. Aries is all about the now. And as we can see here, we have the moon. There's a conjunction with Venus, and then there's a sextile going on with Pluto, which is quite interesting. even though it's a bit out of sign, right? Pluto at 29 Capricorn. So desire runs high during a period like this. And if you're experiencing a bit of the existential drift, it doesn't mean that you cannot have some spark in some desire. If you're in a couple's relationship, this would be a really good time to have a discussion. Who are we? What are we doing? What are we doing? And how do we gain more immediacy of the now? Right? This is where we are. I think that, even though Mercury is not necessarily fully engaged with this discussion, although over the next couple of days, by tomorrow, the moon will be, right, as it moves into a closer sextile with Mercury. These discussions are really good. Who are we? What are we doing? What's important to us? And it's great to have long-term goals. We're not living in a long-term timeline, though. I mean, there are people that are promoting this idea that by 2030, we're going to have a very different world. That's not very long. It's 7 years out. So what's important now? If you're in a couple relationship, what is important right now? Because that is the immediacy of Venus moon. When we come close to this idea of death, I mean, everything is finite. Things get very clear. Very, very clear. So if you're in a couple relationship with this idea of death and ending and sacrifice looming in the background, all of a sudden, a lot of your bullshit goes away, right? You get really clear about what's important. Today's a great day. And even the next couple of days, even tomorrow with the moon moving into more of a tight sextile with Mercury, you talk about these things. If you're not in a relationship, clearly you can still have a relationship with your emotions, because that's what Venus and the moon are all about, right? Your relationship with your emotions. And I think even with this whole stellium of Aries, there's something catalytic about it. It can really ignite some self-awareness. Aries can be very self-interested, no doubt about it, right? But there's also, we've lived through this really weird time where we've been called to sacrifice, our individual point of view for the greater good. And the people that are pushing that idea, they have no investment in the greater good, really. Only from a perspective that has some degree of financial control and power associated with it. So there is an opportunity today with this, army of Aries all lined up here, right? All lined up. Where even if you're in the existential drift, with the right conversation, with the right relationship to what's important now, you can make some interesting breakthroughs. And there's a lot of passion in the sky today, and a lot of impassion. It'll be interesting to see how this whole thing with James O'Keefe plays out in the public square. A lot of Aries. There'll be a lot of people with a lot of very strong feelings. Very, very strong feelings. This is an interesting day astrologically, for sure, because we have this looming sense of being adrift in space, and yet there's also this stack of immediacy in wanting results and answers and action in the now. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. To get out of the existential drift, you will need the other. Very interesting. Mars in square with Neptune. I'll leave the weather on this note. Don't play the victim. Do not play the victim. And Mars is going to continue to move closer into that square with Neptune. The energy is, I think, very, very conducive to playing the victim. Everybody gets wounded here. Right? Everybody gets wounded. And the best remedy for dealing with wounds is to help other people. Get out of your own wound. All right. Let's talk star of the day. This was a hard star of the day. I say that a lot, but it's true. I could have gone in a number of directions. Today was Dr. J's birthday, and Dr. J really is an archetypal Pisces. You know, he's an archetypal Pisces. He was in a movie about basketball called The Fish That Saved Pittsburgh. And I think he was the name of so he played a professional basketball player on a team in Pittsburgh called the Pittsburgh Pisces. And Dr. J is a Pisces, right? And so he's got an interesting chart. And that would have been a great anecdote, but I just shared it with you. And then there is also Kyle MacLachlan's birthday, you know, the guy from Twin Peaks and Dune and Blue Velvet. He's got a very interesting chart. You know, you can see the sort of the Blue Velvet like foundational piece in this chart. He's got Sun Mercury in the 8th house, right? Blue Velvet's a really 8th house movie. And he shows up in a lot of these very intense films. And, you know, his first movie is Dune. And I'll never forget when he stuck his hand in that box with Linda Hunt, I think, the Bene Gesserit. And I think it's Linda Hunt. It's not her. It's one of the other Bene Gesserits. And in the box, you know, the hand feels like it's on fire and it's burning. And you know, when he pulls it out, it's just going to be bone, right? And he has to keep his box in there. It's a test. And the phrase "fear is the mind killer" comes up during that scene, and that's a very 8th house thing, right? To test one's fear. So he's an interesting character for sure. And apparently he's a descendant of J.S. Bach. So there's a lot of meat on the bones for Kyle MacLachlan, which I just shared some of. But today is Ted Kennedy. Boy, oh boy. And the reason I picked Ted Kennedy is he's got one of the weirdest fucking charts I've ever seen. This guy's got a weird chart. He's a weird dude, weird chart. Look at this. Look at this. So there's this Venus-Uranus conjunction in Aries, hello, and trine Jupiter and Leo. Teddy liked the good things in life, didn't he? Relationships are unusual, and sometimes they start quickly, and in the case of Chappaquiddick, they can end quickly as well. He has one other harmonic, what I would call a harmonic aspect, and it's Chiron, sextile Pluto, and that's it. Everything else is squares and oppositions. He's got one of the weirdest charts I've ever seen. Right, we see Pluto over in the 7th house, and you know, that can be till death do us part with Pluto there. Also be death in relationship. Mary Jo Kopechne, who is associated with the whole Chappaquiddick thing, if I'm not mistaken, is July 22nd. So they're both 22s. I think they might even be opposites, right? February 22nd, July 22nd. So that's interesting in and of itself. And here we have, again, the 8th house. I was talking about that with Kyle MacLachlan in Moon Neptune. Look at that Moon Neptune conjunction. Look how tight that conjunction is. And in Virgo. Ted Kennedy, if looking at his chart here, this dude is insecure. He's very insecure. And of course, he has a long history of alcohol abuse. Well, there's more than alcohol abuse in Ted Kennedy's background, which I don't really want to get into right now. But let's just say I know some stories. This is the chart in many ways of a weak man. of the three brothers, he's certainly the most compromised. Had he not got into that accident on Chappaquiddick Island, there's probably a pretty good chance he could have been elected president, especially born on the 22nd, right? That's a master number. So Kennedy had the world in front of him, but with this chart, he didn't make it. So he was a long time politician and bellicose and, always theoretically fighting the good fight. But this is a dude that's compromised. I can tell you right now, this opposition compromises him deeply. He's got Mars and he's got Mercury in Aquarius. So, we talked a little bit about that yesterday, that the early Pisceans have Mercury, a lot of times have Mercury in Aquarius. So there's a bit of a rebellious side to Ted Kennedy, always fighting the Democratic good fight. I think he was one of the guys who went after Clarence Thomas, which is really odd in a lot of ways. He's going after Clarence Thomas because of some theoretical porno video that, he was checking out from some store in Georgia. Meanwhile, he's involved in one of the biggest scandals in terms of the death of somebody that was associated with him. So, to me, this is, again, very much this duality between the skeletons in the closet and sort of being the attack dog here. He has Saturn 29 Capricorn and opposing Pluto. This is an interesting opposition. And I'm going to give you a little inside baseball on Ted Kennedy here. In the book, The Gemstone Files by the late Jim Keith, he writes extensively about conspiratorial stories, one of which, of course, is Chappaquiddick. And the first person that Ted Kennedy called, according to Jim Keith in this book, was Aristotle Onassis, who at that time had firmly entrenched himself into the Kennedy family by displacing his older brother. And Onassis cleaned everything up for him because he had a lot of power and a lot of money. So here we have the Saturn-Pluto opposition, right? And even Onassis, who is involved in shipping with Pluto and Cancer, right? This whole idea of, the waters. And this is also alcohol. Cancer, Pisces, Scorpio, they all have some degree of the alcohol quotient. Of course, Ted Kennedy was an embodiment of the whole alcohol thing. He has a lot of anoretic in a chart. He's got that Saturn at 29. Like, that's a test. He didn't pass the test. And that degree of Capricorn for the Sabian symbols relates to a group of men that meet in private and basically, determine the fate of the world. That's that degree of Saturn in Capricorn. That's where Mars was on the night of Trump's election. And then the next day when we woke up, Mars was in Aquarius, and this radical and aggressive new age had begun. Very interesting chart. 29 Pisces. He's sacrificial. It's the last degree of the zodiac. It's interesting that his two brothers are the ones that died. Whatever you think of the Kennedy assassinations, in our purview, they're gone, and he's the one that's left, right? He's the one that's left behind, and did they sacrifice themselves for him so that he could be the one? It's an interesting concept. Not that they said, okay, well, we're going to sacrifice our lives for Ted, but that's really what it looks like, right? And that's the degree of the crucifixion. This is a chart with a lot of tests, and I'm not sure he did a very good job meeting those tests. One man's opinion. All right, that's the start of the day, Ted Kennedy. A little late today, a little long today, but I felt the need to talk about this whole Piscean mythos that we're in now. James O'Keefe really embodying that. Whatever you think of him, whatever you think Project Veritas. You know, he's being sacrificed. Right. All right. So if you like this conversation and you would like to have more of this conversation, albeit a little less on the astrological side. See, I feed you the astrological stuff in the morning. I'll be over here, 15 minutes of flame at 9:11 a.m. That's my website. And I'll be talking a bit more about James O'Keefe and some other things, some other crazy things, like Pete Buttigieg and his weird interview yesterday. And so there's a potpourri of things to talk about. And clearly we'll address them over there. I do have a sponsor, and at the end of the show, I do want to talk about the sponsor, and that is True Hemp Science. I'm not going to do the visual. I'll just talk about it here. TrueHempScience.com. If you're interested in CBD and some of the best CBD that I've had, I was on a little text last night with a friend and a follower of the show, and going through a very stressful time. We're all in it now, right? This is the pressure cooker of stress, going through a very stressful time, finding out something about somebody she loves, which unfortunately, it's not great. It was a secret. And she found this out. Of course, these secrets have a way of really changing our perspective and relationship with other people, ourselves, and the world. And she was just not in a good place. And so what did she do? She took some gummies. Time for sleep. Gonna hit that sleep gummy. That's exactly what she did. So that's another benefit of True Hemp Science's products. They work. They're good. So if you go to truehempscience.com, there's a whole host of products there. If you buy $100 or more, type in 15MINS, and you'll get some free stuff. And I talked to another client yesterday, and she got some free goodies, and boy, did she like those free goodies. So that's truehempscience.com, and then type in 15MINS and spend $100 more and get your free goodies. All right, got to go. Got to prep for the next show. Have a great day. Use your head in order to discern what's real. Your heart, too simple as possible. From myself and the king, who's laying down next to me. Take care. Have a really blessed day.